Welcome to Spooky Ass Shit. I am your host, Eric Dwinells, and tonight, look, I got the biggest clue of all for you, what the August shows are going to be about. In fact, I might as well just tell you now, the August shows are going to be all about the Manson family. Now, of course, the Manson family story has been covered probably a bazillion times, but I think we are going to have some unique takes on it. I'm doing the show very differently than I normally do. I think you guys are going to dig it. And so it's kind of like a very special event here on Spooky AS. But sometimes, like I said before, you have to go back before you can move forward. So I'm going to take you back and do this remix episode. Even though the episode's not very old, it still might be new to some of you. And even if it's not new, I want you to listen again and have this fresh in mind before we start our new series about the Manson family. So tonight we are talking about the Beatles and Charles Manson, how he interpreted the Beatles' White Album and what he said it meant for him and the group known as the Manson family. So before we dive into that, I want to tell you I'm actually recording this on the digital recorder that you the Spookaroos, bought for the program. So thank you for that, because otherwise I'm not sure I'd have time to do this recording. And why is that? Because I am busy filming a movie with Adam Sandler. In fact, I'm sitting on location right now, just waiting to be needed, so I figured I'd take out the recorder and I'd talk to you guys for a little bit. So here we are, doing just that. This is the Halloween special or Halloween movie coming out on Netflix. I don't know if it will be out in time for this Halloween or if it's something for next year, but it's called Hubie Halloween right now. You know how Hollywood is. They might change the name, but it's called Hubie Halloween. I don't really know what it's about. I don't know much about the project except that Adam Sandler stars in it and Steve Buscemi's in it. And it's set in Salem, and it's set at Halloween, so of course, they needed me to be there. So I'm in this film as an extra, But, so I'll tell you more about that next time. But for now, let's take a look back and listen to the Beatles and Charles Manson. Welcome to Spooky Ass Shit. I am your host, Eric Wells, and tonight we are going to talk about the Beatles' White Album and its connection to the Manson family murders and kind of the mythology that they, meaning Charlie really, I suppose, and to some extent the prosecutor of the Manson family murders, the mythology that they kind of built up around that record. This is the 50th anniversary of that record. It came out on November 25th here in the United States, although it came out a little bit earlier over in their home country of England. And I was inspired to do this particular episode about this connection because, well, I'm a huge music fan, as you know, especially if you listen to the early episodes where I did a whole bunch of episodes all about music and Satan and rock music and hidden messages and all that stuff. I love music. It's one of the passions of my life, and I love talking about it and sharing my enthusiasm about it. So even when it's spooky stuff, like we're going to get into tonight. But also, and a bigger influence on this particular episode was that frequent guest co-host, Fatima Elmi, is in a group called the Ultrasonic Rock Orchestra. I think she might have mentioned that on the show before. And as a celebration of the album's 50th anniversary, her group did the entire album in concert. And I attended that concert. They did a wonderful job as usual. If you get the chance to see them in the Boston area, or they often play at Foxwoods Casino. So if you ever get the chance to see the Ultrasonic Rock Orchestra, I recommend you check that out. And say hi to Fatima if you do. But of course, as I was sitting there watching the show, enjoying it, I can't help but have a little piece of my brain say, this is the album that Charles Manson used to help convince his followers commit murder for him. That is, if you believe the prosecution story as to how and why the Manson family murders took place. And we're going to get into that, and we're going to get into a whole lot more. But before we do, I want to remind you all to check out the website if you still have not done so, spookyas.com or spookyasshit.com. they both take you to the same place, and that is the show's blog page. From there, you can listen to each and every episode, including the ones no longer available on iTunes. You can also find links to our social media. We are at Spooky Ass Shit on both Instagram and Twitter. And you can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/spookyas. And while you're on Facebook, don't forget to join the Spookaroos. That is our closed group where you can share your crazy little private thoughts with people who won't judge you as harshly as the outside world might, because we all go a little mad sometimes. And with that out of the way, let's get into it. Now, brief rundown. I'm going to kind of go timeline style, basically, for this episode. But in case you don't know, if you're a younger listener who's never heard of the Manson family murders, or you're only vaguely aware of them, which is hard for me to believe, because as a true crime person and as someone who grew up watching true crime shows and reading true crime books, I mean, the Manson family murders has got to be one of the top on everybody's list, I would think. But as I try to look information up and I see, different YouTube videos, different clips of different things related to the Manson family, and even when Charles Manson himself passed away recently, I was surprised that there wasn't more about it, that it wasn't a bigger deal than it was. I was kind of happy to see that too, because I think he enjoyed his celebrity in his own way. So I'm kind of glad that he didn't get all this grand attention or whatever. But it was interesting to me. So I think that time has kind of passed this case by, and it's not as famous as it used to be. Now, I know that Quentin Tarantino is at this very moment working on a movie called Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which is, I don't know if it's about the Manson family murders or if they happen and that is just kind of part of the movie, but that movie is in the process of being made, so maybe this will revive some interest in the case. But to me, this is a very, very interesting case because Charles Manson was a man who was basically a convict. He'd been in prison pretty much all of his life. And he would get out here and there, but he was always getting caught doing something ridiculous, some minor crime that because of some strange twist in the law, he ended up spending a lot of time in jail for, like forged checks, and he'd be in jail for years because he did it over state lines or something like that. These aren't the exact details. Don't quote me on any of this. This episode, by the way, as I just said, it's not a full episode about the Manson family murders or trials. This is specifically how the murders and the Manson family relate to the White Album. The most of what we're going to be talking about is just that connection. We're not going to deep dive into the Manson family or the murders themselves. We'll save that for a different episode. We will get to it. But for now, we're just talking about the connections to the album. So, Charles Manson gets out of prison in the late 60s, and he finds himself in San Francisco, LA, traveling up and down the coast of California, and he puts together a group called The Family. He's a 30-something convict, but he is enticing all these young, hippie-ish girls to come and follow him, and a few men as well as some bikers. We'll get into that. And at first, it's all peace and love and free love and drugs and happiness and singing and music. But as time goes on, things got a little bit darker. He started talking about the end of the world, which at some point he began calling helter skelter. And this was going to be a race riot, basically, between the black population of the United States of America, who had been suppressed and held back for so long. They were going to finally rise up to take revenge on the white man, killing the white population except for Charlie and his followers. And we will get to all of that as we discuss the timeline here. So, with that in mind, let's go through, step by step, what happened between the Manson family and the Beatles' White Album, the connections that are made there, and what it has to do with this series of murders. Now, as I said, Charles Manson had recently gotten out of prison in the late 60s. He somehow commandeers a bus, and he is driving with his, what we would essentially call a cult. And it starts off small with just a few ladies and grows bigger as time goes by. and he calls this cult the Family. And he calls it the Family because he says, he's not the leader, he's just one of the members of the family, and they're all a family, they're all brothers and sisters, and, all this stuff that he was laying on to get people to follow him. He was basically manipulating these people into following him through the use of what was hip and current at the time, the hippie movement, and peace and love and free love and do as thou will and all that kind of stuff. And so anyway, he had this bus, and in November 27th of 1967, the Beatles release an album called The Magical Mystery Tour. And the first connection made with the Manson family starts there because as Charles Manson and the family drove around, they called this moving around their own Magical Mystery Tour. In April of that year, 1967, Martin Luther King was assassinated. And Charles Manson would later comment that this was a, quote, heavy number. And also he commented on a news report, according to family members, saying that the shooting of a young unarmed black man by California police was a sign of the times, and it wouldn't be long before the black man started to revolt against the white man because of these things that keep happening. November 13th, 1968, the animated movie, The Yellow Submarine, based on the song of the same name by the Beatles, is released in the United States. This will come into play later. On November 25th, the Beatles release the White Album. Actually, the name of the album is The Beatles, but everyone calls it the White Album because the album cover was just a simple white cover with an embossed The Beatles written on it, and that was it. So people just call this one the White Album. That's what we are going to be referring to it as, although technically it is The Beatles. So it's released on November 25th in the United States. From the reports that we have from family members, Charlie hears it sometime before the end of December of that year for the first time. And he had been a fan of the Beatles. He didn't allow a lot of music wherever his family was staying, and they had multiple spots where they would stay here and there. But he was a big fan of the Beatles, and he would allow the Beatles music to be played. But at New Year's Eve of this year, around a campfire on a cold night at Myers Ranch, which was one of the ranches where the family stayed sometimes, family members gathered around the campfire to hear Charles Manson give a sermon about the prophecy of what he called helter, skelter. Now, to understand this in full, we can't just talk about the White Album, because one of the things you have to understand about Charles Manson and his family members is that he and they believed that he was the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And because of that, we have to look at his interpretation of the Bible, specifically the book of Revelation. If you are unfamiliar with the Bible, towards the back, there is a book called Revelation. And this book contains prophecies, and depending on which branch of Christianity you ask, you'll get different answers as to what exactly the author is trying to relate here, whether it's an exact interpretation of what the end of the world will be, whether it's talking about Armageddon at all, whether it's talking about something that was happening during those times. You ask different groups, you'll get different answers. But according to Charlie Manson, this book of Revelation was about stuff that was happening right now, meaning the late 60s. And he featured prominently in it, but he wasn't the only one, because he related the Beatles to the book of Revelation as well. So I am going to read some Bible verse for you, and I am also going to tell you Charlie's interpretation of it. And when I talk as Charles Manson, I am going to use an accent, a southern accent of sorts, and it's going to be cartoonish, and a bit exaggerated, and I'm doing this to separate his voice from my voice, because Charlie says things that Eric definitely would not say in a million years. So please keep that in mind. I do apologize. There are going to be some vulgarities and some slurs thrown around. It's Charlie. It's not me. Also, when we do get to the White Album, I am going to sing a little bit for you. I don't want to plug in the songs because that would technically be, well, maybe not illegal, but it would be some murky water, perhaps, according to some of the websites where this podcast gets posted. So under fair use, since we are discussing it and reviewing things, I think it would count. But some of these websites are real sticklers for using any kind of samples, so we just won't do it. I'll just sing a little bit for you. Do not judge my singing too harshly. I am not spending a lot of time editing this and fixing up my voice and all that, so just enjoy it if you do, and if you don't, keep your opinions in your pocket, mister. Before we get into the Bible verse, let me give you a brief synopsis of what this whole helter-skelter scenario was, because I think if you know the basics ahead of time, you'll be able to understand why some of his followers were able to believe that, oh, this book really is talking about this, or the album really is talking to us. So basically, the idea was that helter-skelter was a term that Charlie used for this war that was coming, and all of the hurt and pain and confusion caused by the war. This was all helter-skelter. It wasn't one specific thing. It was an umbrella term for all of these things. And what he was saying was that, and again, this is Charlie speaking, not me, the black men of America have been taking shit so long from white people that they are getting sick of it. And they are going to rise up. They're going to start killing white people, the Black Panthers especially, and basically they are going to take over the world. They're going to murder the white people and take over the world. And Charlie says the only reason they haven't done this so far is because now in the late 60s, they have gained access to white women. So during this time, interracial dating was picking up a bit more, although I bet it was still pretty risky in some areas. But he was saying that the black man has been appeased by this. Again, Charlie's words, not mine. And that as long as they are getting these white women, they might be appeased. But soon, once access is restricted because of white racism, then the black man will again see the injustice in the world, and they will rise up and overthrow their white overlords. Now, when this happens, Charlie and his family were going to go to a bottomless pit in the desert. Except the pit wasn't really bottomless, because somewhere underground they would find an enchanted city of gold where they could hide for decades if necessary and wait for helter-skelter to end. And while they were down there, they would have dune buggies, which they would drive around inside the caves, but also sometimes they would go back to street-level Earth where they, helter-skelter was still going on, but they would go out and they would save white babies and that had been, orphaned by this war going on, and they would take them back underground with them. And at the end of this, Charlie said that because the black man has never been in charge of running things, he doesn't know how to do it. He would need white people to come and rule the world for him. Once they realized that, Charlie and the family would step out of this bottomless pit and say, "Hey, black people, I'm here. Don't worry. I'm a white male. I know exactly what to do. I'll run things. You just be the good little servants that we need, and you can live a happy life." That was Charlie's idea. And he believed that this whole thing would start after he and his family recorded a music album and set it out into the world. And this would be the fulfilling of prophecy prophesied by both the Book of Revelation and the Beatles. This album that the family was going to create would turn on, in the parlance of the time, the white young generation, which the family called young loves, and these young loves would come and join the family in this pit, and also it would spark the black man to rise up and take control of his own destiny and begin this race war where they start killing white people. So that is the bare bones of it. Let's get into the fine details, starting with the Book of Revelation. Chapter 7, verse 4. And I heard the number of them which were sealed, and there were sealed 144,000 of all of the tribes of the children of Israel. Now, the mention of the number there, 144,000, would be the number of members in the Manson family when, after the actual war, the family would emerge from the pit to rule the world. And Charlie would say to his family, "It will be our world then, and there will be no one else in it, except for us and our black servants." Now, as it stood before this so-called war began, when the family was hanging out in these different ranches and everything, they had nowhere near that many members. So, how is this family going to increase in size if they're living in a bottomless pit? The increase, it was said, would be the result of the family procreating while they were hiding underground, and from these new members who would join the family after hearing the family's album, which would draw in the young love that we spoke earlier, the young white people. The family would also go out on their dune buggies and rescue babies made homeless by helter skelter. Chapter 9, verses 2 through 3. And he opened the bottomless pit, and there came out of the smoke locust upon the earth, and unto them was given power, as the scorpions of the earth have power. According to Charlie, the locust in this verse are the Beatles. Get it? Beatles, locust, Beatles. And as for the scorpions of the earth having power, well, that's Manson, because his astrological sign was Scorpio. And the bottomless pit that we mentioned, that of course is the underground city where the family's going to hide. Verses 7 through 8. And the locusts' faces were as those of men, and they had hair as the hair of women. This is a reference to the Beatles' long hair. Verse 17. And thus I saw the horses in the vision, and them that sat on them, having breastplates of fire, and the heads of the horses were as the heads of lions, and out of their mouths issued fire and smoke and brimstone. According to Charlie, the breastplates mentioned in this passage refers to the Beatles' electric guitars, which they held up high on their chest. The fire, smoke, and brimstone coming out of their mouths, well, that was a reference to the Beatles' powerful lyrics. Verse 7. And the shape of the locusts were like unto horses, prepared unto battle. This, according to Charlie, was a reference to the dune buggies that the family would be riding during Helter Skelter. The family was definitely preparing for this because they were stealing dune buggies all over the place, and that was something that a lot of them got popped for right around the time of the murders. So they would steal these dune buggies and they would fix them up according to their own specifications, actually according to Manson's specifications, and he wanted machine guns mounted to all of the dune buggies. This way, the men would drive the buggies and the girls would be in charge of operating the machine guns. Verse 15. And the four angels were loosed, which were prepared for an hour and a day and a month and a year, for to slay the third part of men. The four angels, well, that's the four Beatles. They are prophets who are preparing the way for Manson to lead the chosen people away to safety. And the part where it talks about slay the third part of man, that is the black man destroying the white race. Verse 16. And the number of the army of the horsemen were 200,000, and I heard the number of them. The 200,000 horsemen were the motorcycle gang members that Manson was attempting to recruit into the family in advance of Helter Skelter. Now, these motorcycle gangs, they were going to be the security force, basically. They were going to be the necessary military wing that would help protect the family as they went out cruising in their dune buggies during Helter Skelter. The thing is, these people weren't as susceptible to Charlie's manipulations, and so when he went out and told them about peace and love and free love and drugs, the bikers were like, yeah, we don't care about all that shit, man. Like, you pay us and maybe we'll help you out. You give us drugs, maybe we'll help you out. You give us women, maybe we'll help you out. And that was the part that Charlie latched onto. He could get them women. But for the most part, he wasn't overly successful in attracting most of these biker gangs to his aid as he hoped that he would be. Because the bikers kind of looked at Charlie as this little runt, former pimp. Basically, they thought he was a bitch. So most of them didn't really care to hang out with him and listen to his bullshit all day long. Verse 4. And it was commanded that the locust should not hurt the grass of the earth, neither any green thing, neither any tree, but only those men which have not the seal of God on their foreheads. Now, when it talks about not hurting the earth or anything green or any tree, that is, according to Charlie, that means that nature will be preserved. It will only be humans that will be destroyed during Helter Skelter. And the seal of God on their foreheads, that would be a special mark which would indicate whether someone was on Manson's side or not. And those without it would ultimately perish. Now, Manson himself never described the mark on his head, but he did tell his followers he would be able to recognize it when he saw it. And later on, famously during his trial, he carved an X into his forehead, saying that he had X'd himself out of society. Whatever, Charlie. But his female followers, who several of whom hung out outside the courthouse, sitting on the sidewalk, they carved X's into their foreheads too. So perhaps this was also a little bit of a throwback to this verse of the Bible. Verse 1, And the fifth angel sounded, and I saw a star fall from heaven unto the earth, and to him was given the key to the bottomless pit. Well, obviously, this fifth angel with the key to the bottomless pit, that's Charles Manson. So we know that according to his interpretation, the Beatles comprised the other four angels. So Charles Manson was this fifth angel, and he told his family that he knew this was true because the Beatles were sending him messages through their music, through their own recordings. They were sending messages to not only him, but to the family as well. So let's dive in and see what Charles Manson thought some of the songs on the White Album said to and about the family. I'm not going to go through and pick out every little thing because we'd be here all night, but these are some of the highlights of what Charlie was thinking the Beatles were trying to say to him. From the song, I Will. And when at last I find you, your song will fill the air. Sing it loud so I can hear you. Make it easy to be near you. According to Charlie, this verse meant that the Beatles were looking for Christ and waiting for him to sing his song. Jesus, of course, was Charles Manson, and the song was the album that the family was going to record. From the song Honey Pie. Oh, honey pie, my position is tragic. Come and show me the magic of your Hollywood song. Again, the Beatles are talking to Charlie, Jesus Christ, and they are saying, we know that you've returned to Earth and that you are somewhere in Hollywood, Los Angeles. They want Charlie, later on in the song, to come to England because they are lazy. But Charlie says, no, they have to come to us. But the song that they want us to create, that is the album that we talked about earlier that will set off Helter Skelter. Now, the Beatles also had a song on this album called Sexy Sadie, and this struck the family as amazingly coincidental because they had a family member who, by most accounts, had been nicknamed Sexy Sadie before this album came out, and that was Susan Atkins. They called her Sadie Mae Glutz. And that they all had different aliases, by the way. They had a string of, everybody had a different name when they dropped out of society and joined the family. So they all had a string of aliases. But Susan Atkins was sometimes known as Sadie Mae Glutz. And when the song came out, it blew the family's mind. And Charlie said, "You see, this is exactly what I've been talking about. They wrote a song with a specific family member mentioned right in it." And even Tex Watson, who was a family member and would go on to be one of the killers, and he was kind of sort of Charlie's right-hand man in some ways. Again, we won't get into the whole family dynamic in this episode, but a well-known family member, he wrote in his own autobiography that the words to the song Sexy Sadie fit Susan Atkins so well that it, quote, made us all sure that the Beatles had to be singing directly to us. Watson specifically noted that the song's title character, quote, came along to turn everyone on, broke the rules, and laid it all out for everyone to see. Atkins, he said, had broken all the rules, sexually, and she liked to talk about her experience and her lack of inhibitions. Before she joined the family, Susan Atkins was a topless dancer. From the song Rocky Raccoon. Now Rocky Raccoon fell back in his room, only to find Gideon's Bible. Gideon checked out and left in no doubt to help with good Rocky's revival. Coon, said Charlie. You know that's a word they use for black people. You know the line, Gideon checked out, left in no doubt to help in good Rocky's revival? Rocky's revival. Revival. It means coming back to life. The black man is going to come to power again. Gideon checks out means that it's all written out there in the New Testament, in the book of Revelations. The song Happiness is a warm gun. Not any specific lyrics necessarily, but this was Charlie saying that the Beatles are telling the blacks to get their guns and kill white people. Now for the title song to this whole event, Helter Skelter. When I get to the bottom, I go back to the top of the slide, where I stop and I turn and I go for a ride. According to Charlie, this verse meant that the blacks were gaining more power. That's according to some members. Other members of the family said that Charlie interpreted this meaning that the family was going to go back to the top of the slide once they return from the bottomless pit. So they're coming out of the pit and coming back to rule the world. Continuing on in the song. Look out! Helter Skelter! She's coming down fast! Yes, she is! According to Charlie, this was the upcoming explosion of race-based violence in America. And these, he said, were the last few months, weeks, perhaps even just days of the old order. The she in She's Coming Down Fast, according to Charlie, was Helter Skelter. It's coming down fast. Manson also stated that if you listen closely, you can hear the Beatles whispering for him to call them in London. The song Blackbird. Now, this is another one. There aren't any specific lyrics necessarily. It's just the song in general is about the rise of the black man. Take your broken wings and learn to fly. That means get your shit together and take over from the white man. And you have the power to do so now. From the song Piggies. In their eyes there's something lacking. What they need's a damn good whacking. This, according to Charlie, meant that the blacks were going to give the piggies, a.k.a. the white establishment, a damn good whacking, meaning they're going to murder them, basically. This, according to the family, was a phrase that Manson particularly enjoyed. Continuing with the same song. Everywhere there's lots of piggies living piggy lives. You can see them out for dinner with their piggy wives, clutching forks and knives to eat their bacon. Now, according to Vincent Bugliosi, who prosecuted Manson and Manson family members for the murders, he drew attention to this line. He noted that Lino LaBianca's body, one of the murder victims, he was found with a knife stuck in his throat and a fork sticking out of his stomach. So although no family members directly referenced this song, aside from... Okay, so there were also clues written in blood. I forgot to mention that part. At both murder scenes, there were clues written in blood, and they included... I shouldn't say both murder scenes, because there was actually 3. Phrases like pigs, political piggies. Now, this was fairly common parlance in the 60s in the United States at this time to call police officers pigs and members of the so-called establishment or the old order pigs. So this doesn't necessarily connect itself right with the White Album, but it doesn't not connect it either. And then, of course, the Beatles do have this song, Pigs, Piggies. It does seem to be about some sort of establishment, like a ruling class. So I'm not saying that they were talking to the Manson family, of course, but this is, in essence, I believe, what the song is about. Maybe not with the murder and all that, but anyway. Revolution 1. But when you talk about destruction, don't you know that you can count me out in? Now, the singing of the word in after the word out, that does not appear in the lyrics that were printed along with the album. It's not an official lyric. If you listen to other takes, John Lennon does not say in after he says out. And yet, on the official recorded version, the one that's on the album, he says, when you talk about destruction, you can count me out in. This, according to Charles Manson, was a message to the family that the Beatles were ready for the revolution. They were no longer about peace and love, which had been what their music and their imagery was about up until this point, but like the family themselves, they were ready for revolution, although they had to hide their true intentions from the establishment, or else the record wouldn't get made. They had to put these messages between the lines, or between verses, I suppose, according to Charlie. Continuing on with the same song. You say you got a real solution, well, you know, we'd all love to see the plan. This, according to Manson, was a message from the Beatles that they wanted him to tell them how to escape the horrors of Helter Skelter. They were ready for violence, and they wanted Manson to create his album that would tell him what to do when this war starts. The songs will be the plan, whose subtle messages will be aimed at various parts of society, such as the Beatles themselves, the young loves, the biker gangs, that these people will be able to escape Helter Skelter by following the messages on the record and joining the family in their city underground. Now, we have the song, and I use song in quotation marks, Revolution 9. I say quotation marks because it's not actually a song in the traditional sense. This is a piece that Manson himself spoke about the most. It was the one he deemed the most significant on the whole album. It is really what you might consider an audio collage, and it runs more than 8 minutes. It has no lyrics. It's got no real music to it. It's sound effects and people talking and stuff like that. Manson hears machine gun fire, the oinking of pigs, and the word rise. Now, some of that stuff is actually on the recording, and some is debatable, but that's what he says he hears. He says that the Beatles recorded this song basically as a prophecy. This was the sound of Helter Skelter, the end of the world as we know it. The name of the song and the repeated utterance of Number 9. Number 9. This is a reference to chapter 9 of the book of Revelation. Revolution 9 is a prophecy, just like Revelation 9 is. Revolution 9, Revelation 9. Get it? Of course, longtime listeners will know that this whole number 9, this is not the first time we've heard about this on the show. Go back and listen to our episode about backmasking, and you can hear hidden messages that some people heard in the voice saying, number 9, number 9. Now, rise was one of Manson's big words, and in fact, it was one of the words that was written in blood at some of the crime scenes. Manson said that he would, the Manson family said that Manson would scream the word rise, rise, rise as Revolution 9 was playing. And from the time about 2:33 till 2:50 on the actual recording, you can hear a voice that does say a word repeatedly, although it sounds more like they're saying right, not rise. It sounds like there's a strong T in there, but go ahead and give it a listen to yourself. Tell me what you think. Also on this song, Prosecutor Bugliosi points out that at around the 2:15 mark in the song, you can hear a voice saying something that seems to include the words, quote, lots of stab wounds. But no family member has ever referenced it, including Charlie, and I listened to it and I don't think I hear anything that sounds like lots of stab wounds, so perhaps Bugliosi is falling for a bit of audio pareidolia himself. There's a word we haven't had to say in a long time. I miss it. I love that. Manson also hears the Beatles whispering, Charlie, Charlie, send us a telegram. At about 3 minutes and 50 seconds into the recording, a voice that sounds like it could be George Harrison does, in fact, seem to say something about a telegram. I'm not sure if it says, Charlie, Charlie, send us a telegram, but okay. So that concludes the breakdown of what Charlie thought the songs in the White Album meant, what he told his followers. They're sitting around the campfires, they're moving around to different ranches, they're getting paranoid, they're talking about this upcoming war, they're talking about the differences between the races and the strife that's coming, they're talking about world events that are happening that are shaping things and causing outrage amongst all kinds of different people, but especially black people. Black Americans are no longer going to take shit from the white man. They're going to rise up, they're going to murder the white man, they're going to take over, they're not going to be able to control it in the end. Charlie and his family will emerge from the pit, take over, and rule the world, in theory, along with the Beatles, I guess. With that concluded, let's move along to our timeline and see where all of this goes to. On January 10th, word comes from Manson, who is staying somewhere in Los Angeles, that the family should move from the desert into a house that he has found. Because the house is painted canary yellow, and it's a place where the family, who are busy preparing for helter skelter, would be, quote, submerged beneath the awareness of the outside world, Manson names this house the Yellow Submarine. On April 1st, on or around April 1st, the family starts moving back into Spahn Ranch. This is a place they had stayed at before, and the owner was an old blind cowboy. And Charlie basically got the family permission to stay there by telling some of his girls to, quote, be nice to George Spahn. It had been a former, not movie studio, but a location where people could come and film movies with, sets to look like an old Western bar and, stuff like that. So the family enjoyed spending time there. And so now they were moving back in. They'd been thrown out because they were running an illegal nightclub and the police were coming. This time they went back and they just kind of said, hey, fuck George. We need this place to figure out how we're going to survive helter skelter. And it's our direct access to the desert through this trail. So we need this place. So who cares what this old blind man has to say? Girls be nice to him, but whatever, really. While they're staying at Spahn Ranch, they vandalize several areas with graffiti, including references and lyrics to Beatles songs. Sometime around mid-June, While Manson and a family member known as Paul Watkins are discussing Helter Skelter, Manson tells Watkins, "It's taking too long. It looks like we're going to have to show Blackie how to do it." On July 27th, something very significant in the timeline happens here. In a dispute over money, family member Bobby Beausoleil acts on Manson's orders and murders family acquaintance Gary Hinman. After stabbing Hinman to death in his apartment, Beausoleil writes "Political Piggy" on the wall in Hinman's blood. On August 6th, Beausoleil is arrested after he is caught driving Hinman's stolen car, and the knife used to stab Hinman is found in the car tire's well. On the afternoon of August 8th, Manson tells family members, "Now is the time for Helter Skelter." On August 9th, just after midnight, acting on Manson's instructions, 4 family members, including Tex Watson, Linda Kasabian, Susan Atkins, and Patricia Krenwinkel, get into a car. Charlie meets them near the ranch exit and, leaning into the car, says to them, "When you do it, leave a sign. Something witchy. Tex knows what to do." The 4 then drive to 150 Cielo Drive, where Linda Kasabian, reportedly having second thoughts and in a panic, refuses to enter the property. She waits outside while the others sneak in and brutally murder Sharon Tate, Wojciech Frykowski, Abigail Folger, and Jay Sebring. Susan Atkins writes the word "pig" on the house's front door in Sharon Tate's blood. When the killers return to Spahn Ranch, Watson assures Manson it was Helter Skelter. The next day, just after midnight, August 10th, family members carry out a second attack. This time they murder Lino and Rosemary LaBianca in their home. Using the LaBianca's blood, one of the killers writes the word "rise" and "death to pigs" on the living room wall. They also write Helter Skelter on the refrigerator, although they misspell it and they actually write Helter Skelter. Healter. So again, the point of tonight's episode wasn't to go into full detail about the Manson murders. We will do that another time. This is just showing you the connection between the Beatles and the Manson family murders. This is a connection that I am sure the Beatles would rather not have, but it's there. We can't deny it. Though I do think you would have to be somewhat crazy to believe that the Beatles were trying to communicate personally with Charles Manson and members of his family. So, yeah, the connection's there, but it's only there because a crazy person saw it there. For his part, Charles Manson denies that any of this is true, basically. He says that he doesn't really know what people are talking about when they say that he said that he was, Jesus, that we're all Jesus. He gives some very roundabout answers. He also states that, yes, there's messages in the music, but that's not his fault. He didn't write the music. And he also says he didn't tell these people to go out and murder people. They did that on their own. And he doesn't know what people are talking about when they talk about Helter Skelter as a race war. In fact, let's look at the court transcripts and see what Charlie had to say at the time when he was questioned about it during his trial. When they asked him about Helter Skelter, he said, "It means confusion, literally. It doesn't mean any war with anyone. It doesn't mean that some people are going to go out and kill other people. Helter Skelter is confusion. Confusion is coming down around you fast. Is it a conspiracy that the music is telling the youth to rise up against the establishment because the establishment is rapidly destroying things? Is that a conspiracy? The music speaks to you every day, but you are too deaf, dumb, and blind to even listen to the music. It is not my conspiracy. It's not my music. I hear what it relates. It says rise. It says kill. But what do you want to blame it on me? I didn't write the music." Later in life, of course, first of all, Charles Manson was found guilty of murder and conspiracy to commit murder and sentenced to jail. He ended up serving his entire life in jail, but he was occasionally put up for parole. he would usually not attend his parole hearings, but once in a while he would. And at one of his parole hearings, he again basically said that this whole helter-skelter thing was a myth that was created by the prosecuting attorney, Vincent Bugliosi, and that he had to say these things because that's the only way he could get a jury to believe that somehow he was responsible for a murder that he wasn't even physically at. So he says, quote, "As far as lining up someone for some kind of helter-skelter trip, that's the district attorney's motive. That's the only thing he could find for a motive to throw up on top of all that confusion he had. There was no such thing in my mind as helter-skelter." And even more recently, Manson spoke about the Beatles and Helter Skelter and messages in music, and actually I have audio of that. Unfortunately, the interviewer on the clip is off mic a bit, so he's a little hard to understand, so I will be paraphrasing his questions to Charlie and then letting Charlie answer himself. Hello, Charlie. Welcome to Spooky Ass Shit. I was wondering, the Beatles seem like a big influence on you and the family and the mythology that you guys had. Could you tell us, what were the Beatles to the family?
Kids. Little kids, yeah, they were little kids. I want to hold your hand, yeah, well, they still want to hold my hand, so it ain't nothing changed. They get older, we get older, but they're just kids as far as I'm concerned. McCartney, or whatever his name is, don't know what he's doing. He's up there making music with people that's creating babies all across the country, that he's the father of all kinds of things that he doesn't even have the brains to realize. You don't lay with that snake, or the snake is going to eat you sooner or later. Then you look down the street and you wonder why your children are all wondering. It's all kinds of different ways and things of doing all kinds of stuff.
And can you tell us about Helter Skelter?
Helter Skelter was their song. They wrote it. I didn't have no particular meaning to me. The district attorney picked up on that and made it into his trip. That's what I call confusion. That's Helter Skelter, It just means confusion. That's an English word. It's, I bet. And then when the Beatles come up with it, that was their song. They were playing to those teeny boppers. Son, I'm not a teeny bopper. I like their music. Their music was okay, but my music is, I'll tell you where my music goes. It goes, riff. Royal Air Force. Don't sit under the apple tree with anyone else but me. That's where I'm at. In other words, like, I'm still in the bagpipe. I haven't lost the perspective to that,
But did you ever claim to hear hidden messages in the music of the Beatles?
Come on, man. The music gives everyone messages. That's what music does. How do I have to appear like I'm some kind of maniac because I can hear something that the music says? When the music said somewhere over the rainbow, in other words, I'm still there over the rainbow. And what's that? Kate Smith came out with that, there'll be bluebirds over the white cliffs of Dover. I'm still in Dover. I haven't.
But I don't think the family was entirely wrong. I do think there is one song that does seem to contain a little bit of prophecy, and that is the song Sexy Sadie. Now, I say this because Susan Atkins was involved in the murders, of course, and she was known as being the most vicious of them, and a lot of people who knew her thought she was a little bit left of center, a little bit crazy, if you know what I'm saying. And in jail, later she would claim that she did this because she was afraid of other inmates, so she kind of bragged to them to get them to fear/respect her. But she is the one who talked to other inmates and told people that she and the Manson family were responsible for these series of murders. She was in jail for reasons other than murder. It's a whole thing. We'll get to that later. And so she, while she was serving time, started to brag about this. And this led the other inmates to tell the guards, and this led people coming to speak to her, and she initially gave a confession, which is how the family, who was not even anywhere close to being questioned for these murders, this is how they eventually got snared, even though she recanted her confession later on Charlie's orders. But the lyrics to the song start with, I'm not going to sing this time, I'm just going to read it to you. Sexy Sadie, what have you done? You've made a fool of everyone. Sexy Sadie, oh, what have you done? You broke the rules. You laid it down for all to see. So, again, perhaps, Sexy Sadie, you'll get yours yet, however big you think you are. Oh, Sexy Sadie, you'll get yours yet. So again, perhaps there is just a little bit of prophecy in that. She is the one who spilled the beans on the family, and she's made a fool of everyone by getting them arrested for murder and locked away for life so far in every case, although who knows, it's possible that some of them might get paroled at some point. Charlie won't, he's dead and gone now. But I do think it's a shame that this record, which I consider a great record, I know a lot of people kind of think of it as uneven, but to me this is a perfect record to be a desert island disc, because it's got a lot of music on it. First of all, it's got 30 songs on it, and they're all very different, so you get a good mix of styles and sounds, and I could do without number 9, but the rest of it I enjoy for the most part. So if you are not familiar with the Beatles' White Album, murder aside, I suggest you listen to it. I'm a big Beatles fan, so take it with a grain of salt, but if you're not a Beatles fan, that's something wrong with you. That's not something wrong with me or my musical taste. That's something wrong with you. So, that being said, why don't we give one of the Beatles the final say on Charles Manson and his connection with the White Album and his interpretation of it. Again, the interviewers are a little bit hard to understand, so allow me to introduce you all to John Lennon. John, welcome to the show. I wanted to ask you, sorry that this is the question I have to ask you, but could you tell me your thoughts on Charles Manson?
I don't know what I thought when it happened. I just think a lot of the things he says are true. That he's a child of the state, made by us. And he took their children in when nobody else would, is what he did. But of course he's cracked, all right.
But I mean, what are your thoughts on him kind of blaming it on the song Helter Skelter?
Well, he's balmy. He's like any other Beatle kind of fan who reads mysticism into it. I mean, we used to have a laugh putting this, that, and the other in a light-hearted way that some intellectual would read as some symbolic youth generation what's it. But we also took seriously some part of the role, you know. But, I mean, I don't know, what's Helter Skelter got to do with knifing somebody? You know, I'd never listened to the words properly of Helter Skelter. It was just a sort of a noise, you know.
Until next time, don't be afraid.